Together we're going to construct a exterior in 2-point perspective, so outside or a street scene. So I'm going to start the same way I start with every single one of my perspective constructions. That's going to be with my horizon line. So somewhere near the center of my page, I'm going to set my ruler down and draw a horizontal straight line that represents my eye level as the artist and as the viewer. So every perspective construction starts with that horizon line. Since this is 2-point perspective, we need 2 vanishing points. So one on the extreme left-hand side of our horizon line and one on the extreme right-hand side. When you get to start to create your own more imaginative perspective constructions, it's normally best to have your vanishing points way outside of the picture plane. That way things don't look so warped or so stretched out by having vanishing points way off to the edges outside of the paper. But for our basic construction, we're keeping them on the picture plane so that we can learn how to construct them properly before we maybe make it more creative. So I have my horizon line in. I have my 2 vanishing points since we're doing 2-point perspective. And now I'm going to start to make some buildings. Again, since this is 2-point perspective, the only thing that stays straight up and down anymore are verticals. So I'm going to start near the center of my page. Again, I can eyeball it. And I'm going to do a vertical that doesn't quite touch the top of my page, so it goes below that. Goes down through my horizon line and stops before it hits the bottom of my paper. This is going to be the first building that I make. In 2-point perspective, it looks like we're looking at the corners of objects. So we're going to have one side of our building vanishing off to the left, one side vanishing off to the right-hand side. So the same for our interiors. It's as if we were looking at the corner of one room and we were standing in the opposite corner. This is going to be as if we're looking at the corner and we can see 2 streets going off in different directions. So for that vertical I just drew, I'm going to take the bottom point. I'm going to line that up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw a line towards the right. I don't want it to go all the way back because I'm going to have more buildings along this side of the street. Do the same thing now for the top. So the top of that very first vertical is going to line up my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw down towards the right. To finish out this side of my building, all I need to do is add in a vertical that connects these 2 converging lines. So I'm the artist, I get to decide where that's going to be at. And I drop down a vertical that connects the 2. Goes through my horizon line and connects at the bottom of that converging line. So this is one side of my building going back in 2-point perspective. And now I need to do the other side. So the bottom of that first vertical that I made to start making this building, that is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw back towards the left. Same thing for the top. The top of that very first vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw down towards the left this time. I don't want to go all the way over, so I have space for other buildings. Now to finish this side of my building, I'm going to add a vertical. Remember, I want to keep my verticals straight up and down or parallel to the side of my picture plane. I don't want them to bow out or in. I want them to stay as straight as to vertical as I can. And then connect those 2 with the vertical, and then I can erase off the extra lines that I might have overdrawn. So that's my first building in 2-point perspective. I'm going to add 2 more buildings on this side, the right-hand side of my street, and 2 more buildings on the left-hand side of my street. So I'm going to give myself some space. I don't want it touching. I want there to be like a little alleyway between these buildings. So I'm going to move my ruler to the right of the end of that first building. And this time I'm going to do a shorter building. So it's not going to be as tall as the first building. I'm going to go underneath that. And I'm doing another vertical that's again parallel to the sides of the building. And I'm stopping at the same point that my first building ended. So I'm going to now take this building and I'm going to converge it over to the right-hand side vanishing point. So the bottom of that vertical I just made for this building lines up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw towards the right. I'll make this one a little bit longer. Do the same thing now for the top. So the top of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw down towards the right. So I'm basically just making big boxes that go through my vanishing point. So I'm not really seeing the bottoms of things or the tops of things, it's all encompassing that. To finish out this side, I'm just going to add a vertical that connects these two converging lines. Again, trying to keep it as parallel to the picture plane as I can. So that finishes out the right-hand side of this building, but I need to do the left-hand side. So I'm going to take that and converge it over to my left side vanishing point. So the bottom of that first vertical I made for the second building, I'm going to take that point, I'm going to line that up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw back just until it hits the side of the first building that I drew. And again, this is as if there's an alleyway or a little bit of space between these buildings. Same thing for the top. The top of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left. Again, I'm going to draw back just until it hits the side of that building. And that finishes out my second building. I'm going to add a third building on this right-hand side. So I have my center building, a second building, and a third one over here. So again, I'm going to start by giving myself a little bit of space. So I'm going to move my ruler over to the right from the edge of that second building. And this time it's going to be a taller building. So I'm going to start tall, and it's going to go down through my horizon line, but again, it's going to stop at the same point where my second building in this case ended. It can't go lower than that because that would mean that it's below the sidewalk. And in reality, that just doesn't happen unless we do a lot more tricks with perspective there. So the bottom of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw back towards the right. Do the same thing for the top. Top of that vanishing point, top of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw down towards the right. You can see that my angles are getting really, really steep. So really, really steep here on the sides of these buildings, and that's because my vanishing points are within my picture plane. If I were to make this into a more kind of finished, detailed drawing, I would move those vanishing points outside of my picture plane, farther away, so that those angles weren't as steep and it would look a little bit more realistic. So to finish this side, I'm going to add a vertical that connects these two, so straight down between those two converging lines. So you see that often in reality, you're not going to see this steep of lines, because perspective does happen in reality. The lines wouldn't be so steep because your vanishing points are way, way, way off to the sides in your peripheral vision, which we can't really do on a paper unless we extend our vanishing points way, way off the paper. So that vertical that I first made for this third building, I'm going to take the bottom of that, I'm going to line that up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw back towards the left until it meets the end of that second building. Same thing for the top. So the top is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw down for a ways. I'm not going to go the whole way back because I don't want my building to be that big or that thick. And then where I let it stop, I'm going to do a vertical straight down. Again, trying to be parallel with my other verticals or parallel to the side of my picture plane. It's going to go straight down until it meets the top or hits the top of that second building. So I have 3 buildings so far, 1 in the center and 2 on the right-hand side of my paper. I'm going to add 2 more on the left-hand side of my paper. So this time, I'm going to start with a vertical again, but my ruler is going to come a little bit over towards the left of my very first building here. And I'm going to do a vertical that's a little bit taller than my first building. It's going to go down through my horizon line, and it's going to stop again right at the bottom where my first building stopped. It can't go any lower than that. Now I'm going to converge this over towards the left-hand side. So the bottom of that vertical I just drew is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw towards the left. This is going to be a skinny building. Do the same thing for the top. Top of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw down towards the left. Where I let these two converging lines end, I finish them out with a vertical. Again, a vertical that's trying to stay nice and parallel with my picture plane and the other verticals that I'm drawing in my perspective construction here. Vertical connects the two, and then I'm going to erase off my extra lines that I overdrew. Now this side, the left-hand side converging side is done. I'm going to have the other side converge back in space towards the right. So that first vertical I drew to make this second building here on the left, the bottom of that is going to line up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw back to the right just until those that converging line meets the vertical that ended my first building. Same thing for the top. So the top of that vertical is going to line up with my vanishing point on the right, and I'm going to draw down to the right. I'm going to draw it all the way until it hits my first building. So it's a little bit taller, or maybe the same size as my first building. So now I have center, 2 on the right, 1 on the left. I'm going to add one more building on the left-hand side of my city block here, my exterior. So using my ruler, I'm going to move it over a little bit to the left of the end of that second building. It's going to be shorter. So I'm going to start a little bit above my horizon line and go down and stop again right at the bottom of that second building. Can't go any lower. Now it's going to converge over towards the left-hand side. Bottom of that vertical lines up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw again back towards the left. It's going to be a long, short building. Same thing for the top. Top of that vertical lines up with my vanishing point on the left, and I'm going to draw towards the left. Add some extra there. And then again, to finish out this side, I drop a vertical down between those two converging lines. I'm the artist. I get to decide how big or tall or short or skinny, wide these buildings are. So now I have to finish out the other side by taking that first vertical I made for this third building on the left-hand side. I'm going to line that up with my vanishing point on the right. I'm going to draw back towards the right until it meets that second building at the bottom. Do the same thing for the top. Top of the vertical lines up with my vanishing point on the right. And I'm going to draw down towards the right until it meets the end of that second building. So I have 6 buildings in my block here for my 2-point exterior.